So you've decided you wanted to purchase an everyday carry gun, but you're not exactly sure where to start because there are just so many different options and so many opinions out there online. So you've come to the right place. The goal of this video is to give you a guide on some things I think you should consider if you're looking to purchase an everyday carry handgun. Before we jump into some of these opinions, there are a couple things that I do want to kind of mention up front. First is that I'll be using two different pistols to drive home some of these points so things aren't as abstract. I have a 1911 and a Glock 17 here. These are both actually considered to be full-size pistols, but I can still get my point across. Second, when I mention everyday carry, I'm referring to you carrying a modern automatic pistol concealably and legally in public. This means I won't be talking about older or more obscure guns or even revolvers or open carry. Thirdly, this video just represents my own opinions. This is by no means a hard fact kind of thing. You should look at several other sources as well, because the more things you research, the more informed you can be, so you can draw your own conclusions. So I may some things that may either surprise you or some people may disagree with, so just keep in mind these are only my opinions. And lastly, when I give all these different considerations, recognize that this is a video, and so nothing really replaces the abstract than going to a gun range and actually trying out these guns and shooting them yourself. It's really good to have things to consider, but ultimately you do need to feel these in person and have these in your hands for something tangible so you really can make your own conclusions. So with these things out of the way, I'm going to talk about a handful of things I think you should consider when you're looking to purchase an everyday carry gun. I'll break down each of these into sections and also wrap up with just some other kind of miscellaneous thoughts as well. So let's get to it. So generally, when you're looking at different handguns to choose, typically what you want to consider falls into three different buckets. The first, you're looking at footprint, which refers to the size and weight of the gun itself, its ammunition capacity, and then also the ergonomics of the gun. Does it feel good in your hands? So starting off with footprint, again, this is on size and weight. Like, how large is the gun that you're considering? What you would usually think at first glance is, I want the smallest and lightest gun possible, which in theory is correct, but you will find as you look for different guns, quickly as you go towards the smallest and lightest gun, you start to make trade-offs in other areas which can impact your shooting experience. So for example, if you want a really small gun, typically what's going to happen, but not always, is you're going to have less ammunition capacity. And also because it's smaller, it may be harder to hold depending on your hand size. And if it impacts how comfortably you can hold the gun, so your grip, that can sometimes also impact the amount of recoil that you can comfortably manage. Now, if you're a bigger person with bigger hands, maybe a smaller gun will help you grip the gun better just because there's so much of you to hold on to it. But it's still something to consider that smaller isn't always better. You typically want to find a balance between what's too big and what's too small. In my opinion, weight tends to follow the same train of thought. If it's too heavy, obviously that's uncomfortable. It can maybe sag your pants too much and you need to get a really sturdy belt or holster to carry that. And you have to consider your phone, your keys, your wallet, or just anything else that you carry on you every day. On the other hand, having something a little heavier can help you with recoil as well. So when I mention several of these different things, these are all just things you would put on a spectrum to consider what is the kind of like the right balance between all of these. Because there are so many different trade-offs and so many different sizes and weights out there, typically what you'll see is that guns are broken down into three main categories, but there are definitely more. You will see full-size, compact, and also subcompact guns, as well as some kind of hybrid or crossover models. Full-size starts off being your normal kind of regular size big gun, and then you get compact, which is smaller, and then if you want to go even smaller, you have subcompact as well, and then there are maybe some other things as well, but typically these are the three. So to drive these points home, I have two pistols on the screen here. One of them is a Glock 17, the black one, and then the brownish one is a Colt M45A1, which is a 1911 design pistol. As you can see here, the 1911, although it is larger, it is actually a thinner gun, which some people do like more. And so this is just another thing that you want to consider when you're actually at the shooting range, is how do all of these different lengths, widths, and heights play out for something that makes the most comfortable shooting experience for me. I also do want to focus a little more on grip as well, which is a pretty important factor. Here in the screen is the Glock 17, which I mentioned before is a full-size pistol. but you can also have those compact or subcompact guns, which I mentioned before. What this means is that the overall length of the gun, particularly on the barrel and the slide, will be reduced, and then also the grip itself will usually be shortened as well to make the whole thing more, as the name suggests, compact. But as you can see here, if the grip is too small, then maybe my pinky doesn't actually rest on the grip, so it can be a little uncomfortable or just a little harder to hold in your hands. A shorter slide does make things more concealable, but can also impact your accuracy for science reasons. But typically when you're using a pistol, you probably will be at ranges where your practice with the gun and your familiarity with it will matter more than just the actual length of the gun, in my opinion. So coming off of size, a very related topic to that is ammunition capacity, as I mentioned earlier. As you can see on the screen now, we have the 1911 magazine and then also the Glock 17 magazine. Although both are similar in height, you can see that the 1911 magazine is much slimmer than the Glock 17 magazine. Because it's a much slimmer magazine and because the caliber of the ammunition it holds is larger than the Glock's, it holds only 8 rounds, whereas the Glock holds 17, as I mentioned before. Now, one thing to keep in mind too is that we saw that the Glock, although is smaller, it holds double the amount of ammunition with the standard magazines. So again, just something to keep in mind that size and capacity don't always share a one-to-one relationship. Now, in terms of 9mm or 45 or which caliber of ammunition you should choose, I will oversimplify here just for the sake of being concise. I would choose either 9mm or 45, go to a gun range and actually shoot a pistol that's chambered in either of those, and then kind of compare which you like more. Keep in mind that 45 tends to be more expensive and tends to hold fewer rounds than 9mm, but again, just go to a gun range and just choose the one that you like more. And then the final thing I'll throw out there on ammunition capacity is that depending on the state you live in, you may be legally restricted to only have certain types of magazines or certain capacities, so that's just another thing to pay attention to. So the third and final main topic I'll talk about is ergonomics, which is just, do you like how it feels in your hands? It's best to really just go in person to a gun range or shoot a friend's gun to really feel it and hold the pistol and make sure it's what you like. So when you're actually holding these guns, there are still some things in particular you should pay attention to. I know I've hammered home grip a lot, and I've probably said that word 50 times already, but it really is important because it does impact your shooting experience. So when you're trying out different guns, really pay attention to whether you can get a good, comfortable, firm grip in your hands on these different pistols. So for example, here with this Glock, you can see it has a bit more of a curved grip to it, whereas on the 1911, it's a much straighter grip. I actually do prefer the grip of the 1911. I feel like overall the design is just more ergonomic and more comfortable, but the Glock is also very acceptable as well. Also keep in mind that grips can be changed out or you can do aftermarket alterations to them. So while it's definitely a very important foundation, there is a little bit of wiggle room you can do afterwards, but it will require time, effort, and probably some money if you don't have the skills yourself to change them. The same thing goes for sights. Pay attention to which sights are the most intuitive to you. For example, for Glock sights, it's a pretty common gripe that the stock ones that come on the gun when you purchase it are not really very intuitive and they're not really easy to use. I tend to agree with this. It's nothing practice can't overcome. At the same time, I do think that this 3-dot setup that I have on my gun is a lot easier to use. It's the same kind of setup on the 1911. This is 3-dot white sights on them, and I think this is better than any kind of other alternative that I've used on other guns in the past. But this is all really just personal preference. Also for sights, just keep in mind you can also swap these out as well after you've purchased the gun, but that's just another thing that you have to buy as well. So these are the 3 main areas that I look at when I'm considering purchasing another everyday carry pistol. So again, those are footprint, which is your size and weight of the gun, the ammunition capacity, and also its ergonomics. So those are the main topics that I wanted to touch on, but I do want to devote a little bit of time to some kind of miscellaneous or other subjects as well. The first would be aftermarket support. So if you find that you like a very obscure gun that no one really knows about, is very kind of uncommon, you will find that it's harder to find either upgrades or replacement parts or even holsters for your gun. Especially if you are trying to carry this gun concealed, that usually means you want some kind of holster. And if your gun's really obscure, you may have a harder time finding a quality product that's out there. As opposed to a pistol, which is really common, it's just going to make your life that much easier. So something to also consider. Another thing I'll touch on briefly are hammered versus striker fired pistols as well. You may have heard about this already, but as you can see on the screen here, I have one of both. The 1911 is a hammer fired, whereas the Glock is a striker fired. These are just different designs that accomplish the same task. I personally wouldn't put too much weight on this as your first time gun. They do have some advantages one over the other, but overall I would just probably keep this as a second-hand consideration and pay attention to the first 3 topics that I talked about earlier and make those your highest priority. The last thing I'll talk about, and this may turn into a little bit of a rant, again this whole video is just my opinion, but try not to get caught up in the little details. And you will get a better sense of what those little details are just as you become more knowledgeable on the topic. I think sometimes you can come across options or different product offerings which offer marginal benefit or solve problems that don't necessarily exist. And because of this, it's just very easy to get overwhelmed for what is the right choice. So to give a very extreme example, if you happen to like a gun out there which carries only 3 rounds versus competition carries 20, obviously that's a pretty big deal for all the practical reasons, just applying common sense. But if you read online or hear from someone that having front slide serrations on your gun, which are just cutouts to make it easier to grip, reduces the mass of the slide because of the 0.25 ounces reduced, and that will run into feeding issues with your gun. Things like that are just, if you use common sense, is that really going to be like a game changer? No, not really. At that point, that's where common sense kind of has to kick in, where, if that's really an issue, surely you would have read about 1,000 times, or is a manufacturer really going to make some kind of huge design flaw like that? Or is that just someone online who really likes talking about the hobby and is pointing out small things that ultimately don't really matter? If you buy any modern gun from a reputable manufacturer, whose names you've probably heard a million times already, so just to name a few: Glock, Springfield, Smith & Wesson, Colt, CZ, any of those big names, unless you really get a lemon, you will get a good, reliably functioning gun, and they will ultimately all do the same thing. They may have different features on them, but I think there comes a point where it's really up to your skill and the amount you've practiced with your gun, and that's what's really going to significantly change your shooting experience and your competency. So it's easier said than done to not get caught up in the little details, because it takes time to understand what is truly important and what's not. But just trust your intuition, and remember that if you don't know, ask around, get many different opinions, or if you have friends who are also into shooting, ask a friend as well if you really don't know. So with all said and done, this wraps up this video on how to choose your everyday carry. Again, these are just my opinions and things that I look out for, things that I consider if I'm purchasing a pistol for this use. But let me know what you think, and also I'd be curious to know if you have any kind of thoughts on what other videos I should do. But in the meantime, I hope you enjoy, and I'll catch you in the next video.